So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. And today we're going to talk about a big collision. We're going to talk about something that is very near to all of us here in Southern California. I'm talking about the fires that just raged through our community, which were incredibly devastating. We'll talk about that in a second. But thank you all for tuning in today. It means a lot to me that you're listening to this podcast, and I hope that I'm bringing value to you. If you like what you hear, I again plead with you to pass on this podcast to other people in your life, your friends, your family. We're building an audience for my guests to come on, and these are great people that I bring to you on a biweekly basis. As you all know, I'm taking a little bit of a break from the daily work I was doing, but I still have got a very big interest in this podcast, and so we will be coming to every other week. So today, without further ado, today is a pleasure to welcome to all of you, Jon Sorensen. He's a licensed family therapist, LMFT.
Yes.
LMFT and license. What the M stands for? What again?
Marriage and family therapist. I'm a lumped, Dr. Hamilton.
You're a lump. Okay, that's kind of how
Yeah.
I feel right now too. So you're a
Yeah.
licensed marriage family therapist. You told me that before you started, but I looked
Mhm.
at the M and I messed up on it.
No
Okay,
worries.
so he is in private practice in Santa Monica, and now he has got his own podcast named JS Wonders. J standing for Jon S. Sorensen, Wonder, Wonders. This is a podcast of him just wondering, thinking. And Jon, I'm proud of you. And you've already got like over 60 uh, podcasts that you've already done. It's amazing.
Yep.
Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Check that out as well, friends. So today, we the issue on the table. By the way, Jon has been on our show before. It was a while ago. We were talking about the pandemic and the trauma of that. Now we go from one trauma, the pandemic, to a very different trauma, which is a conflagration of fire that destroyed literally thousands of homes and businesses and other structures, both in the Palisades, Pacific Palisades, and a little bit east of us called Eaton, Eaton, the Eaton Fire, which really took out a lot of Altadena and Pasadena and places over there. And so both of these were gigantic fires that got into the neighborhoods. Usually, listen, we have fires in Southern California all the time. Excuse me, typically in the fall of the year when the Santa Ana winds begin to blow. And these are mighty winds that blow out of the desert. And they're blasting about 50, 60, sometimes 70 miles an hour. And so these are big time winds, which typically cause just damage. They knock over the trees and, rough up things a little bit, maybe take a couple shingles off your home. But when you add fire and wind together, you have a inferno. And that is exactly what happened to the Palisades. And Jon, I'm going to stop talking here, but I do want one of the individuals who was directly affected by this fire was Jon Sorensen and his beautiful family who live in the Palisades
Hmm.
and lived in the Palisades anyway. So, Jon, I'm going to stop talking, let you take it from there. So, tell us, first of all, maybe a little bit about your personal story on what happened with your family, maybe how that day went, that Tuesday, that infamous day that we all remember um, in January.
Yeah, Dr. Hamilton, I can take you through that and you just sort of direct me if it gets a little bit long. But we had evacuated or near evacuated a couple times in previous years. And so you get accustomed. And there had been a fire that had been knocked down in the highlands a day before. And all of this added up to a certain amount of a blase attitude, right? Like we have in Southern California with earthquakes. It's like, okay, here comes another one. But when I dropped my daughter off at her school, Marquez Knolls, right at the bottom of the hill, I realized something was different when I saw the crossing guard with her stop sign almost be blown over because the wind caught the stop sign. It hit her body. She's a small woman and it almost knocked her to the ground. So I knew it was gusting 70, 80, up to 100 miles an hour, and it was extremely dry. But again, we had been through this drill, and I have a busy day, and we got to sprint and get the kids into school. So I dropped my daughter off. I dropped my son off at his preschool. I went into the office in Santa Monica. My wife went into her office in Brentwood, and I turn off my phone because I'm a therapist and I see clients. But I start getting these dings because my wife is able to, I allow her to ding me in case of emergency. And I had to stop in the middle of a session and go, I'm really sorry, but I need to check, I need to see what's going on. And actually, Casey, your office manager, had checked in with her and said, "Hey, are you aware of what's going on?" And she sort of dismissed it for a second. No, there was something up there the other day and they knocked it down. But anyway, once she realized something was really going on, she had one shot at getting up the hill. At that point, the entire community was exiting. So there was the sunset, every street was packed with either police trying to get in, fire trucks trying to get in, people trying to get out. And she was able to get up. We had two cats and we had some essential documents. And she was able to get that stuff. And she got maybe a football field down the hill and got locked up. And she and our childcare ended up leaving my vehicle, getting out, joining her. It took them probably 4 hours to get off the hill. And the police were having people get out of their cars and walk because they didn't
Yeah.
know if they were going to make it out. Um, so I knew, I knew that something was different, and in my gut, I knew we had one of these old mid-century homes that was half eaten out with termites and lots of wood or whatever. And I knew that if any spark hit that thing, it was not going to be good. But you had that feeling in your gut, but there was just a sprint of like, let's get up on the hill and get my daughter. We didn't manage to get her. They bust them out to Brentwood. Um, you're trying to shield them. You don't, right? You don't know how frightened she's going to be jumping on a bus and driving by all of the fire trucks, but the school did the right thing and they got everybody out. And ultimately, I was able to go pick up my son, whose preschool was in Santa Monica, get to Brentwood so this started at like 10 in the morning. I picked up my daughter by around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We still didn't really know what was going on until our neighbor, who had Ring cameras, texted us and said, "Hey, John, I'm really, really sorry." And at that point, I knew they had been watching on their Ring camera. They had just finished redoing their home. They had gutted their home and redone it for a year. And they lost everything. Everyone on our cul-de-sac, with the exception of one house, was lost ashes to the ground. So you have a normal morning, you go out into the city, and then by that evening, you've got your kids and your cats in a car, and that's it. There's no home left to go to. And I can tell you that I'm pretty adept at dealing with crisis. I deal with other people's crises all day long. I've had lots of experience. I consider myself pretty level-headed. But when I look back, I was in shock. You're in a very, very glassy sort of functional space where people are saying, "Hey, you're doing pretty well, good job." The truth was we had not processed anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's more to the story. I'm just, depending on how long you want me
No,
to.
I think that, I mean, your story is very, very powerful and very compelling. I'm so thankful, and I hear these stories of the evacuation. One of the things that people don't realize is that there are limited numbers of ways to get out of the Pacific Palisades. It isn't like you have these, you can go every direction. You can't go in every direction. You got to go Sunset Boulevard. You go down to PCH, and that was a mess. and you have to go. There aren't a whole lot of, you can go, some of you can get down on Temescal Canyon and Chautauqua, but let me tell you, then you hit PCH, and then you got that mess going on. So I think that when people really talk about Pacific Palisades, this is a historically, up until now, has been a beautiful, beautiful community that was people envied those who lived up there. And but there aren't in a this kind of a situation. You are really limited. So they were, I mean, there were people who were parking their car in the middle of the road. And I think
Yes.
you saw, those of you who watched this on TV, you saw bulldozers come in halfway through the afternoon, early evening, and they were literally throwing or picking up cars and tossing them to the side, bulldozing them out of the way so fire trucks could get through to actually do their job. So this was one of these, and the people had essentially abandoned their cars because they were terrified that they were going to get burned up, and they were walking down the hills, right? I mean, and so
Yes.
that obviously clogged the roadways. So there was no ability for these emergency vehicles to get to where they needed to be. So it was really it was pandemonium, really. And so the fact that the schools, and there were several schools in that community who were able to get their children out. My daughter teaches at Calvary Christian up there, and
Mhm.
she basically walked the children down Sunset, if you know where that is, and she walked
Mhm.
them out to the beach, okay, and they were initially at Gladstone's, and then they walked down further to Bel Air Bay Club. But by the way, Gladstone's went away, as you know, that was burned.
Yeah.
So they were kind of running away from the fire, and these fires go really, really fast. The people don't realize how quickly these fires can. They move really at lightning speed through a community. So thank God that there weren't more lives lost in this fire. So you got your kids, and your where did your wife go, by the way? What I missed her. Where did she end up? Did she get up there and did she get papers and everything?
So she got up there, she got the cats, she got essential documents, we were prepared. She really wasn't expecting, she was figuring out we'll be in a hotel for 2 or 3 days and we'll be back up.
Right,
So we
right.
we really got nothing out, but she was trapped there for 3 or 4 hours at the bottom of the hill where the fire did rage through. But the reason was because they had made space for all of the school buses to get out.
Oh, okay.
So in retrospect, we were happy that it's like, well, they were trapped there because they made sure that, my daughter got out. I'm aware of another story where a director had to grab the last 4 or 5 children from a school in the Highlands and throw them in her own car and drive down with flames, licking up
Oh,
at either side of the road. So people really have no, like if you just heard about it on the news, people really have no idea that it was chaos. It was entirely unpredictable. And regardless of what any of us thinks about whether there was or wasn't water, etc., there was no way firefighters were going to be humanly capable of containing what happened. It was the perfect storm for a wildfire to rip through those entire communities.
yeah.
And they did.
And they did. And I will tell you, and I mentioned this before, but I haven't mentioned it on the show here. Anecdotally, I went up there yesterday,
Hmm.
and I have a friend of mine who lives in the Highlands. The Highlands, for those who don't know, is up the hill, about 3 or 4 miles up the hill from Sunset Boulevard in the Palisades, a beautiful spot. And his house survived, amazingly. Other houses next to him didn't make it. But we went up there, and I had not been to the Palisades for after the fire, and
Hmm.
I was shocked by the devastation, shocked by the amount of the number of homes and the number of businesses and places that are the bank, the Starbucks, the shops that were there are all gone. I mean, they're gone.
It's
There's
decimated.
was decimated, and it looked to me like the aftermath of Hiroshima. And I've been to Hiroshima, and you see the pictures, you see the devastation of that, and there's virtually it's identical. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this looks like a scene from out of a war.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think, kind of segueing here, John, I mean, my prayers go out to your family. Um, Let me ask before we segue completely, how are you doing, your wife and your children? How are you doing now? Where did you find a place to live, by the way?
So we've been recipients of an enormous amount of generosity. We have a deep community that we're very connected to, a spiritual community, a friendship community. And so some of what I can offer you that's our own experience, but also the experience of anybody who's going through this, is there's a lot of conflicted emotions, right? We settled at a friend's place in Westchester that they were just set to Airbnb. They're very good friends of ours, and the moment they knew that this was going on, we had multiple offers from people, come stay in our guest house, come, right? And we moved. We took our kids and we went and inhabited four different places in the first week, which probably was not wise, right, for our mental health. But you kind of get into this panic of, wait, like if it was just adults, we could set up a tent and like whatever. But we've got a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. So
And
um,
how many cats do you have too, by the way?
two cats. It's a real complication, especially when you're leaning on the generosity of other people, their guest house or whatever. Our cats were a problem, right? They were scared and marking territory, like stuff was going on that we were having to manage. But we landed in Westchester, and we're in a short-term rental, and so we have a minute to think about it. And there are people who don't, right? So there's any number of stories to come out of this. And to be direct with you, Bob, we're still scared. I'm still waking up at 2 in the morning with anxiety attacks going, where are we going to land? Did this financially wipe us out? And I share that with you again to say, if we're the recipients of so much generosity and we have a deep, deep community who's so kind to us, it really, really connects you to, man, I got to tell you, this has connected me at a deep, visceral level to the experience of people who immigrate to different countries,
Yeah.
have no money, nobody knows them, nobody cares. Oh, it's just an immigrant, whatever. I got to tell you, my level of empathy has significantly increased because even with the generosity and kindness of the community, nothing erases the feeling that irrationally somehow you're failing your kids. Like, I don't know where they're going to be. I don't know if we can afford to stay in LA. I don't know where we'll be. And those questions that I'm asking myself, again, there are people in far more dire situations who don't even have the hope of an answer, right? And this full spectrum, all the way up to people whose homes didn't burn or people who may have a few million in a bank account. But I got to tell you, nothing erases the anxiety and this very weird irrational feeling of displacement that your home has been fractured, has been taken away suddenly without any preparation, and you have to somehow make this okay for your kids. And that's where it gets really difficult and really interesting.
I just saw a young boy in my office literally before this interview who is having abdominal pain. They lost their home and they too have a story. They're living with friends up in Mandeville Canyon here. And,
Hmm.
it's a nice home. They have, outdoors and everything, but it's not their home. And
Right.
when you're living in a place that isn't yours, and the kids know that, it does change the dynamics of how these kids feel. So he's having abdominal pain. Now, mind you, he's not having, he appears to be fine, and his exam was completely normal. And so I do think that there's a big element here of just him somaticizing his emotions.
Yeah.
and abdominal pain, of course, is one of the classic manifestations of stress. So,
Hmm.
John, so you're living it. So you are you're dealing with this issue now in some of your patients from a point of great empathy because it's personal. But tell us, how do you? Okay, so I have this patient I just told you about.
Hmm.
What would you say to me as a practitioner, and also to this family, in terms of what are the things, how can I help them from a counseling perspective, and how can they take care of their children from a parental perspective? I'll let those are two different questions. I'll let you
Hmm.
answer them.
So I'll start with the kids, right? What's really, really important in any given situation. And I will confess to you that we didn't do a good job. And so I'll tell you how we went sideways and what would have been much better. We were sort of panicked. Like I said, we moved 4 times in the first week. I'm up at 2 in the morning filling out, paperwork for FEMA for that. Right, you're just scrambling because you're in a panic. What have the children lost? They've lost this measured cadence to life in an environment that they were born into, that they've never known anything else. And so the parents are suddenly frantically trying to solve this problem. And I can tell you that at an unconscious emotional level, you're trying to make it as if it didn't happen, which is not possible, right?
Yeah,
But inadvertently, I mean, I feel really sad that I dragged my kids all over the place. We went to these different places. I was going to meet people in the community to thank them for their generosity. And my kids, I'm so thankful for them because they were absolute champions. But that is not the thing to do, right? And if we're going to support parents who have children, who the parents themselves are panicked and they're trying to problem solve, they're doing the same thing that we did. The first thing we need to do for the kids is come as close as we can to creating a measured, somewhat familiar pattern to whatever they're doing. And we need to slowly and gently invite them to come back to be able to talk about their body and what they're experiencing. Because the fire is too big. They don't get it. They don't understand why they can't go home. They don't understand what it means, but they do understand that they have a tummy ache, right?
yeah,
So as a practitioner, if I was seeing them, or you as a doctor, if you're seeing them, to talk in very slow, measured tones and to invite them to just say, hey, could you put a hand on your tummy and just hold it there? What do you notice? What does that feel like? Is that okay? And some of them might not like that, right? So we have to respect their physical boundaries. But the first thing we want to do is to invite them to an understanding that they get to talk about what their body's doing, because they can't even consciously make the connection between their emotional, psychological state and what their bodies, they don't know. They're
yeah.
just a kid. They're just having a somatic experience. So the first thing we have to do is make space for the somatic experience. And again, I confess we didn't do that very well. We didn't slow things down. And you can explore it more deeply if you want more detail, but then to shift to how do we support parents in these situations, whatever that looks like, enabling the parents to understand that maybe the most important thing that they can do for their kids is not to sprint to fill out this paperwork, and is not to do these things that make the parents feel like, okay, I handled it and I'm mitigating the damage that's happening to my family and my kids are going to be cared for. Okay, that's important. Yes, you as a parent, you have to do that. But the most important thing that you can do to support parents is to help them do a short play date with someone that they knew that they used to do play dates with. And if you can do it in an environment that they did it before, the value is enormous,
Yeah.
right? Because, yeah.
No, I can see that. I mean, and you're trying to knit back a life of constancy. You're trying to recreate, if you will, in a very different situation, some kind of a normalcy, some kind of a pattern of living that your children will recognize, that you will see. I mean, frankly, the goodness about your family is you have an intact family. You have a mom and a dad who care desperately for your children. I know your family. And
Yeah.
so you are way, way ahead of other folks who are dealing with this, by themselves, for example. But certainly you want to try to normalize the life of your children. I think, by the way, I'm really, really happy and very proud of our schools in the Palisades who are now back. I mean, they have immediately the day after that fire, they were out renting commercial space here in Santa Monica, and then
Hmm.
within really weeks, they've reopened their schools, and I have to say, God bless them, because one of the most important things that we can do with our children is get them back into school. School is very normalizing for children. They see
Hmm.
their friends. Yes, it may be a different environment, but at least they have their teacher, they have their friends, and that is a very, very positive thing that they can do. So, and your children are back in school too, is that correct?
They're back in school. They did a really good job. I really have to compliment LAUSD. My daughter was in a Marquez charter, and they moved. And something that they did at the new school, they retained all the teachers. They just found a new space for them that they share with another school. And on a Sunday, they would do a play date, right? The school would invite all the parents, all of the parents who were part of that Marcus charter, right? And I know that Santa Monica Malibu is doing the same thing, that these school districts responded and provided a space in which all of those parents who had lost and had to move their kids, and all of those kids got to see their classmates and got to see these other parents who were going through the same thing. And as someone who experienced it, I can tell you that there was immense strength and value
Yep.
getting to
Yeah.
feel a little shaken up, getting to tear up a little bit and hug your friends as adults, and getting to see your kids play with their classmates. Um, Again, it's these very simple, normalizing things where it's a mistake if we focus too much on recovering and fixing and responding to. If we can come back and go, can we just have a little bit of normal life and let our kids breathe a little bit?
Yep.
Um, And I wanted to add something, if you're okay with me continuing,
You're doing great. Keep going.
about kids. And again, I'm always, it's like physician heal thyself. It's like therapist cope yourself, right? It's always amazing when I'm in it, I can get off track and go, wow, I didn't really cope as well as I might recommend for my clients to do. Something that's going to happen with kids that's going to scare the parents, right? They're going to have an emotional reaction. They're going to have an emotional reaction. And I confess that I was somewhat interpreting that emotional reaction as a failure on my part to contain this and to provide for my kids and to give them normalcy. And you start pathologizing your own children just having a traumatized reaction to this very dramatic and difficult and scary change in their life. And in addition to allowing for their somatic responses and being very measured and calm around them and providing them normalizing experiences, we also need to go, they're just going to have emotional responses. My kids, of course, I'm very, very biased, but my kids are just two beautiful little angels who are very, very well behaved. And there was a lot of fighting and squabbling and upset. And occasionally I would see them do stuff where I'm like, well, that's legitimately kind of mean. Like my daughter was just mean to my son, or my son was like, these are not my kids. And so the parents are going to freak out a little bit, like, oh, this thing has happened to us. We have to contain, we have to fix. Oh, what do I do? You know what? You don't have to do anything other than make sure you remain calm, understand that your children are having normal emotional reactions. They're going to be intense, they're going to be uncomfortable. That's hard for you, the parent, but you don't want a child who has no response to that. That means they're probably suppressing, and that means maybe they're going to need therapy in 10 years or 15 years because they haven't really processed.
Yeah.
So, as a community, as people who attend to the parents or maybe advise the parents, and also as the parents, we must make space for those children, those babies, to have unfettered emotional reactions to a very difficult situation and to understand that's not a failure on your part as a parent. This is just a normal human response to a very difficult situation. And we can be loving, we can talk to them about it, we can allow it, we can put boundaries in place. But what we don't need to do is go, oh my God, what's happening? Why is my child? Well, no, this is just a normal human being have a normal reaction to a very difficult situation.
So do you allow your children to, I mean, I'm sure you've had tears and anxiety. I mean, I think that the best you can, of course, you try to not let them see you in these states of maybe panic or emotional. I mean, there's certain emotion I think that's fine for children to see and for them to recognize that you're sad as well. But where's the fine line there?
That is the $1 million question. And that is, there's so much art, there's so much instinct, there's so much science behind what we talk. This is a bigger question of like gentle parenting, and some people think gentle parenting means sort of like bearing all of their emotions because they want their child to understand that parents have emotions too, and that's not healthy, right? A child needs some guardrails. They need to know that there's an adult who can contain their own emotions and can demonstrate and model that behavior. So your kid seeing you get a little teary-eyed or hug a friend and say, hey, this is really hard and we're so sad we lost our home, and maybe you cry some tears, that's amazing. What are we doing? We're normalizing and we're enabling our children to have their own emotional experiences, and we're letting them know this is healthy and we can do it in community, right? In relationship to
Yeah.
people who love us, to who we love. What you don't want, and I've had moments that I've felt like this, there are moments when it just feels so unjust and so shocking, and you feel so angry that your home is gone that you're feeling real anger, or you feel shaky. I've had moments where I felt like I was going to throw up and start crying. Well, I'm having an overwhelming emotional experience. Though that is not to be shared with your children.
Yeah.
That is for you to recognize, oh, as a human being, as an adult, I'm dysregulated. I can use coping mechanisms to regulate. I can breathe, I can ground, I can slow things down. I can talk to loving people in my community. I can check in with
Mm.
my priest, with my whomever, with my therapist, with my cousin, my uncle, whatever. But as adults and parents, we need to go away from the kid space, re-regulate, and then come back. So what we share with the kids, we can share sadness. Yeah, I'm pretty sad. I miss my home a lot. I think maybe you do too. You're welcome to talk to me about that, baby. That's okay.
Yeah.
Um, but if we dysregulate, that is not for the kids. That's not good for the kids. That's never good for the kids.
You're right. And it's not, to see unfettered anger or anxiety or, hyper emotionalism, even now we're dealing with obviously a major catastrophe, but even in normal life, you can, there are things that can happen, money issues or whatever relational issues that can induce those kind of emotionality, which is out of control, as you say. That's never good for kids to see. I don't care what context it's in. I mean, the context of a fire wiping out your house. I mean, the thing is that this is a very different kind of affront than a lot of other things. I mean, the fire, everything's vaporized, it's just gone,
Yeah.
and you don't have your shoes in the closet, you don't have your clothes, you don't have plates to eat on. You have everything's like you just clear erase, and that is I think that's kind of hard for people who've never gone through this to really appreciate what an insult it is. Uh, Fires in particular, and I've dealt with this over the years, being in Southern California, is very traumatic.
Hmm.
I agree that out of control behavior of any kind, certainly in this situation, is not something that you want to demonstrate to your children. Although you're not the only person to feel anger, you're not the only person to feel completely not. You're a little bit you're thrown off. How can I say it? That's kind of what everybody is right now in this situation. Everybody I'm talking to has the same, I haven't quite, I don't think people have quite, come into me, and I've seen lots of people who've lost their homes, who
Hmm.
said, hey, we're ready to go, we're gonna go, they're pumped up. They're not pumped up. They're going through this stage of mourning, and yes, I think they're going to get pumped up, and they're going to get down to work. And I hope that the bureaucrats don't impede people who want to do that.
Yeah.
I will tell you, yesterday when I was up there, John, looking at the community, there was a lot of activity up there. There's a lot of dump trucks coming in and out of that, in and out. There are people beginning the process of cleanup right now. You know that.
Yep.
And my hope is that this will be a quicker rather than a later process.
Yeah, and I want to qualify what I'm saying about, adults having those responses, and I want it to be super, super clear that that's normal, right? That the prohibition is against sort of sharing that with children, thinking that that helps them. Of course, adults are going to have, just one short anecdote. I had been through thing after thing after thing after thing, and I've had to salvage the title on my car, which means a lot of interactions with the DMV. And then I got that flu that was really horrible for 7 days. And I went into the DMV, and I was dysregulated. I was sitting there and I felt like I was going to panic. I felt like I was going to throw up. It's like, well, that's just normal, right? Grief suddenly welled up where it was like, I don't want this. I just want my house back. This is normal. There's nothing wrong with this. So I don't mean in any way to shame adults having those experiences, only to say that the appropriate way to deal with those is to talk to your spouse or to talk to a family member, talk to your doctor, talk to your therapist, talk to your spiritual leader, delve into the adult community to help re-regulate and to co-regulate with other people who care for you, who you care for, right? And then you work that out, and then you come back regulated to your kids.
So, yeah, and that's good advice. Last thing, I'm watching our time here, John,
Hmm.
is you've mentioned spirituality several times. Are you praying with your children? I think when you come together, and I'll just speak for myself personally, when you say, God, you're bigger than all of us. You rule the universe, and you look up, and maybe not out horizontally, but you look up to the heavens, and you acknowledge that there are things that happen in this life that we can't understand, and we just simply have got to believe that there's a God who loves us and has something good that will come of this. I know that's maybe hard to say to someone who lost their home, but is that part of your is that part of the normalization for you and your family?
For us, we have not had conversations, and this again is a case of physician heal yourself or a therapist, begin enacting these behaviors. We have done so much sprinting that we actually haven't sat down and had that conversation. But to respond to what you're saying, and I think this is a different podcast, and maybe you would be interested in the conversation. In my own podcast, I actually address this. There are ways in which this experience has been profoundly beneficial for me.
Mm.
My relationship to a higher power, my relationship to myself as a conscious spiritual being. And I don't think it's necessarily kind for me to share that with people who are struggling, or some people have passed away in, right? So that becomes a very personal experience. But spirituality is a very, very powerful container, maybe the only true container. Right, I don't want to limit for your listeners what that means, but it has been a through point for us, for both Ale and I, my wife and I. And no, sadly, we haven't begun having conversations with our kids about what this means, but it's time, right?
Yeah.
Things are settling down a little bit and it's time.
Well, may that be. I think that sometimes I find that those kind of moments where you can, gather around, hug each other, and say, "Listen, let's just say a prayer and ask God to help us," is one of the most powerful moments that you can have as a family. All right.
Amen to
Well,
that.
listen, John, I so appreciate you and appreciate what you're going through. This is profound and deep, and I you are in a position as a licensed marriage family therapist to really touch people where they're at because you're there too. And God bless you for what you're doing. John, by the way, again, is in private practice in Santa Monica. He also has a podcast called capital JS Wonders, Wonders. Check it out. I'm sure you're going to find a lot of insight with that. What Jon Sorensen is wondering. So good luck on that one, by the way. I wish you the very best on your podcast.
Thank
And
you. I
those of
appreciate it.
you who've been listening today, you've been listening to my podcast, the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. I so appreciate you tuning in today. Until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.